I remember that he resigned, but we're not aware that the Reserve Force Council term of office has expired. But the Deputy Minister is in the meeting. Maybe he would shed light on that one. As to why when the term expires and you don't have a new appointees, that will let these ones go instead of extending their contract until such time you have appointed, you have filled the vacancies, as it were, of your revenue, you've appointed a new council. I don't know. So I remember you were deputy to the chief at the time. So when you retired, you then acted in that position.
Yes, sir.
So that's a position, colleagues. I was not aware of this situation. DM, do you want to shed light on this one?
Chair, once again, thank you for the opportunity and thank you to honorable members. We are presenting, Chair, to yourselves today the status quo as far as our defense reserves are concerned. As General Niabo has said, we do have a situation that as we speak, this contingent of our armed forces is without a properly constituted leadership, in that, as the General has pointed out, the former chief of the South African Defence Reserves has since retired, General Anderson, and General Niabo has been acting, but I can say and confirm to the committee that her performance in standing in as our acting chief reserves has been quite remarkable. She's done good work. The appointment, of course, will be a decision that the ministry will be making, among others, soon. It's a decision that must come from the office of the minister. Similarly, Chair, I also regret that we also are not giving a positive report to say that the term of office of the Reserve Force Council under the chairmanship of General Keith Mukwabe came to an end at the end of the year. And there has been continuous reminders from the former chair that the replacements be effected or be appointed. It is also an outstanding matter. Where we are now, Chair, is that I'm not sure if at the time of the last meeting of the Portfolio Committee, we had shared with the Oversight Committee, the Joint Standing Committee, the information that dialogue had commenced through the first Indaba on the reserves more than a year ago. Task teams, work streams were established for purposes of taking matters forward around the areas that were identified to be components of the system. The new system to be proposed needed to be thrashed out. I will, after the presentation, by General Niabo, share some remarks with respect to that work, but also just share also information with the Joint Standing Committee on Defense on the state of the South African Defense Force reserves, the way I have found it. Fortunately, in the intervening period since our last meeting, we had the discussion of the reserves. I have had the opportunity to familiarize myself with the lay of the land as far as the footprint and the infrastructure and the conditions of our reserves. I have visited all the regions of the reserve, barring one, which is KZN. It was the only one remaining, but I've been crisscrossing the country to see for myself the state of the reserves, and I will share my comments after the presentation. Chair, with that said, can I submit and hand back to you?
Exciting. No, thank you very much, DM. I think that helps. No, it's fine. We'll go ahead and take the presentation from General Diego. But we note that the term of office of the Reserve Council has expired, and that 2.5 months later, the new council has not been appointed. We can only press upon the Minister to make a determination. I'm not quite certain whether she has a choice whether to have it or not. I'm not quite certain about that. I don't know what the law says. But if she has no choice, there's no discretion. She must have the Reserve Council. We want to impress upon the Minister to speed up the process of appointing a new council. So that's what we can say on that part, because we do have the councillors, that there are no councillors. On the issue of the chief of the reserve force, General Anderson retired some time back, and we were informed that he retired, and again, his position remains vacant, and General Diaba is acting into that position. At some point, General, it's other I don't know what is the leadership in the reserve force, besides the what you call the general who is retired and you were deputizing him. Who else is in the leadership of the reserve force? But you would cover that either during a presentation, or if it's not in the presentation, at the end of the presentation. Let me invite you to take us through the presentation. And I note what the DM has said, has done a good job of visiting all the reserve force in all the provinces except Natal. Would appreciate the information that he would appreciate that he shares his experience with us. All right, over to you, General Diego.
Thank you, sir, and a good evening to the Honorable Deputy Minister, Minister Thabang Makwetla. Good evening to the chairperson, Mr. Cyril Klaba, and the members of the committee. Sir, I'm not sure if Admiral Gubu was allowed to get in. He sent me a message saying I should request the host to please let him in, who would like to be part of the presentation.
If the host could grant him permission, would appreciate that. You may go ahead. The host.
He's in the meeting, Chair.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
He's in the meeting.
He's in the meeting. Thank you very much, Honorable Tabo. Yes, I don't see the hands. The screen is black. I don't know whether it's where, but I'm sure, General Niaba, you can set your video on, isn't it?
Is it on now, sir? I'm not sure.
Oh, yes. No. It is on. You
I
can
think
then,
it's on now.
you can then, it's fine now. You can then take us through.
I also requested the host to post the presentation because I had sent it. Okay, we don't have to post it, then it's okay, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. So the aim of my presentation today is to present the challenges faced by the reserves in the department, as I also briefly touched on them when I was presenting to the committee in December. Why can't I move the slides? Can the host please assist me to move the slides?
Can the host move the slide?
Okay, I was going to flight it, but now I've let down, so you can flight now.
I didn't hear that, Nandipa.
I'm saying, Chair, I was going to flight the presentation, but the general is going to flight her own presentation. So I've made her the co-host. She can flight.
I see. General, if you are a co-host, you can do it on that side.
Okay, so that's exactly what I'm trying to do.
Move the slide as and when you want to.
Okay.
I think you're not on it as yet. I think you posted. No, just I think remove that one and then go to your inbox where your thing is.
That's exactly what I'm trying to do.
That's what you're trying to do.
Okay, let me. Oh my God. What's wrong with this?
Okay, no. Don't,
Chair.
okay. No. Hello?
Chair.
Yes.
Chair.
Cabo?
Chair, maybe they can fly the presentation for her. She will just indicate when they must move so that at least
Please
don't put her into too much trouble.
Yes, no, that's fine. We'll assist the general.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
It's not an R1, eh? Yes.
This part, I think I've already introduced myself. I'm Brigadier General Zalaka Niabo, Acting Chief Defense Reserves. My aim today is to present the challenges faced by the reserves to the committee, as I briefly touched on them when I presented. So these will be my scope points.
Yes, sorry, can I manage this? Please, host, wait until she says next. Okay, so you're on the content page, General.
Yes, sir. These are just my scope points. We can go through them. As I've already stated, the aim. Can you move to the next one? Thank you, host. These are just the statutory that informs the existence of the reserves in the Defence Force, as stated in the Defence Review, and these are the things that are done by the Reserve Force. They augment the regular force member. They form part of the standing search military force capability, like we saw in July when there is a requirement. Then the reserves form the expansion capability for the regular force members. They also provide specialists and scarce skills, like in the Army, we have a pool of specialists. In SAMS, we have surgeons, because we are not always capable of keeping some specialists in the department because of our budget. Also, the Air Force has pilots who some of them have flown the president. They also have specialist capabilities for reconstruction and development. An example of this will be Project Kubatlala, a project that was launched by the minister that contributes to the development agenda of the country. They are part of the agri-forums. They promote localized farming, because in the Defence Force, we also procure lots of food, and then they are trying to skill the reserve force members also to become farmers if it's possible, and maybe eventually have procurement opportunities with the department. We also enhance the relationship between defense, public, and private sector. This we do through the Defense Reserve Support Boards that we have in our different provincial offices, because we have provincial offices across the country where we seek reskilling for our reserve force members. We do this some with public departments, like Telkom did a coding course for our reserve force members. And at times we have relationships with institutions like PRASA, where they reskill the reserves and give them alternative employment, because we're struggling to maintain the reserves in the department because of the mandates. And that is now going to be worse with effect from 1st of April, because we are now having a further 25% reduction. Next slide, please. This says the business case for the reserves. As we've already said, that the existence of the reserves in the Defense Force is informed by the Defense Review. I am not going to request what the Defense Review says the reserve capacity should be in the department, because it says it should be 40%. We know that our country currently cannot afford that. So we just want to state the business case of having reserve force members in the Defense Force. For instance, in Operation Corona, they provide 40 to 50% capacity of the 14 companies that we have there. But the budget that is spent on them is only 7.6%. Reserve force members are cheaper to utilize. We don't have to pay them when they are not on call-up. They don't collect any pension. They are only paid when they are called up for the service that they provide. So it's cheaper to utilize reserve force members than the regular force members. There is a need for short-term intervention plan, not for the milestone. I don't even want to refer to the milestone, because with the current economic conditions, I don't think the milestone 1 and 2 that refer to the percentage of the reserves in the Defense Force is doable. So I would not even go there. What we are pleading for is that we at least keep the reserve force component that we have. That is not even 20%. I think it's about 6 or 17%. Some of the slides that are coming will show that. Because if we are going to have a leaner Defense Force, the regular force companies, then we need at least a larger reserve force component. As you can see, if you can look in all militaries around the world, they have reserve force capacity that is larger than their reserve force members, because with the military, you don't know when you will need your military. It's like an insurance policy that you put there so that when you need it, then you can bank on it. I don't think anyone wants to be in a position where they need their militaries, but we know that circumstances that force us to call up our reserves or even utilize our militaries, they always come without us expecting. The situation in Mozambique has even heightened the insecurity in the country. I remember the chairperson in the meeting that we had the other day, he threw out a question saying, how long will it take for you, if you let go of your people now, how long will it take for you to call them up again, train them, mobilize them, and project the forces? There's a saying that stronger militaries are built during peacetime, because it takes a very long time to build up a combat-ready forces. For instance, circumstances that require one to project forces, they can present themselves in a matter of 24 hours. And it's not possible to call up the reserves, mobilize them, and project forces in 24 hours. That's almost impossible. I think some of these things, the lessons we learned in July, and we really struggled, because some of our reserve force members don't receive continuous training. Hence, we are pleading that we are at least supported to maintain and keep the reserve force component that we have, because it is not too large. It's not even 20% of the force. And if we can look in militaries all over the world, they always have a larger reserve force component than their regular force members, so that when you need them, you can always call them up. mobilize them. That is in conflict now. If you look at the reserve force component, it's much larger than they are.
Colleagues, have I lost it? Or it's me who is...
Also on my side, Chair.
All of us, Chair.
Oh.
Me too. Me too.
Okay. No. Thank you very much. I thought the problem was on this side. Okay. Let's wait until she comes back. General, are you back? I don't see her.
I'm going to try to get hold of her on the phone quickly, Chair, and then
Please do.
back to you.
Thank you very much. Please do. I think we lost her. I also had to move the location because of load shedding where I was. So I'm sure she might be experiencing the same problem.
Then it says she's reconnecting.
She's reconnecting. Thank you very much, Admiral.
Thank you very much.
To understand that as well.
Nandipa?
Yes, Chair.
Is she in the waiting room? Can you just check if she is not waiting to be accepted?
Oh, there she is, Chair. I'm admitting her now.
Okay.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are. Okay, that's fine. You are welcome.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Chairperson.
No, we understand this thing happens. Just take your chances over
Yeah. So I was on this point, say that we reserve force members, it's good that we always have a good component that can augment our regular force members, because we understand that with regular force members and the cost of expenditure, we will be forced to reduce the numbers. But it's not wise to reduce the regular force members and the reserve force members at the same time, because should there be a requirement to project forces, then we will be found wanting. We will not be able to deliver on our mandate. And another unintended consequences of having reserve force members that we train, but we cannot call up, is them falling into the wrong hands. For instance, I just like I said previously, the situation in Mozambique has even heightened the insecurity in our country, because the modus operandi of violent extremist organization is that if you become part of an operation that fights them, then automatically we are their enemy. We know we are fighting them in Mozambique. There was intelligence shared this week that there was one gentleman who was arrested in the country, who is a businessman, who was found to be funding the insurgency in Mozambique. But unfortunately, I think the case was thrown out of court because there was no compelling evidence to charge. But if we have that situation, then you have reserve force members that are military trained that find themselves desperate, not having call-ups, but they are trained, then they are just breeding ground for such characters. So these are the things we are pleading that we are assisted to avoid. We do not wish for that to happen. I'm not saying it can happen, but it has happened in the past. So I wish it does not happen in our country. So these are the reasons that we are pleading that we understand we cannot have the 40% reserves as propagated for in the defense review, but at least we should be assisted to keep and maintain the 16 to 17% of the reserves that we have. It's modest, and I think it's reasonable that we keep the number that we have. Hence, I've stated the business case of keeping it, and as I've stated that July taught us many lessons that when we need our reserve force members, we're not going to always have time to call them up, mobilize them, and project forces, because that requires time. Hence, we require that we at least have enough mandates to continue performing continuous training with our reserve force members, so that when there's a requirement, we can just call them up, mobilize them, and project forces. Item 10, which is HR expenditure. This is what we have spent on our reserve force members from 1st April 2021 up to date, which is 2,430,841,746. Next slide, please. This is the number of reserve force members we have, as I've just stated, over the period of 3 years up to January of this year. If you can see, we've been reducing the number of reserves. What has assisted us in doing this? The services are really assisting in mitigating the risk of having insufficient mandates for our reserve force members. Where there are vacancies, they first look into the reserve force members. When they find those who meet the requirement for post, they first translate those into regular force members, and then this might have contributed to the number of reserve force member reducing. Also, what it might have contributed is that we've been decreasing our reserve force mandates. Some of our reserve force members then managed to find alternative employment because they found themselves having mandates that have moved over the years from being called up 31 days a month to now 12 days at times, like the Air Force is doing, trying to adjust to the reduced mandates. So as at 31st of January this year, these are the number of the reserve force members we have in the whole department, all four services, 19,811. These are the ones that we have called up in a year, 13,802, which is, I think we can agree, it's modest. It's not much for us to plead that we are assistant to keep and maintain these reserve force members. Called up in the last 2 years, active reserve force members, 15,267. The mandate budget 2,613,690 in the financial year of 1920, 2021, and then up to 31st January this year, like I've stated in the previous slide, it's 2,765,241. This is the over expenditure that has been incurred over the years. 1922 was 4.8%, basically 5%. You will see that in this financial year, it increased, I think, mainly because we had 2 operations where we had to call up our reserve force members in this financial year. Ops Notlela first, the one where our military forces were assisting government in managing the pandemic, and then also the uprising will fall into that one. We had 2 operations where we had to call up our reserve force members, because as you will see in the slides that are coming, that the case for having reserve force members have been proven in the department. There's not a single operation that our military forces can participate in without being augmented by our reserve force members. So hence here it's almost 20% the over expenditure, but then it's explained by those 2 operations. As I have said, it's reduced again as up to 31st of January this year to 6%, which is not bad considering the value that the reserve force members contribute in augmenting our regular force members. Next slide, please. These are all the arms of services and the number of reserves that they have had. The Army, our landward forces, which has the largest number of the reserve, because they also have the largest number of military forces, regular force members. So it goes without saying that they will have the most of the reserves. Then the second biggest service, which is the South African Air Force, then the least number, and then we have South African Navy with 722, and then we have the medical health services, which is SAMS. What we will realize is that the Army, even though they might use the largest number of reserves, but the money that they spend in the reserve wages might be smaller than SAMS and the Air Force, because mostly in the Army they call up privates, which is cheaper, just to augment the land forces. But in the Air Force, you'll find that they call up experienced pilots, which are much more expensive. And then SAMS, they also will be calling up surgeons and qualified professional nurses. So it's also a bit costly. Then you will realize that even though numbers will be less in these other services, but the cost will be more, because the Army is mainly privates to sergeant, whereas in other services is specialist. Joint Ops also, you see they have the least numbers, and Chief Joint Operation has been saying they need to be given more mandates because they deploy 40% of the reserves in Ops Corona, but they don't really have sufficient mandates to call up reserves, even though in their structures they augment themselves with reserves. So you will see that they're also using the least number. Logistics, they also have number of reserves that assist in their administration. Legal, they have lawyers that assist in their legal processes, they call up lawyers. And the other might be other defense force institutions that do not fall into the services. For instance, I know in the Secretariat there is a reserve force member. I'm not sure if at military ombuds there is, but at the commission, I think they were also, so those are the other that don't fall within the arms of services and division, but also utilize the reserve force members. Then that is the total. Next slide, please. These are the overall challenges facing the reserves continued. The main one now, Chairperson, is the reduced mandates. Mandates have been 2.6 million. Come 1st of April, this financial year, 2022, they've been reduced to 1.9 million. Services have had to adjust. Some have reduced the number of days that they're going to call up their reserves, and some have translated their reserve force members, some of their reserve force members into the regular force members. I know the Army has translated 102 reserve force members into the regular force members. I know the Air Force is planning also with effect from 1st of April to translate 42 members, reserve force members, into regular force members. Navy also indicated that they have a plan to translate some of their reserve force members, even though their number is minuscule. I think it's 10 or less, but they have a plan. So at least the services are trying to mitigate this risk by first checking when there are vacancies. If they don't have reserve force members who meet the requirements of their post, if there are, then they post them in a permanent post. Then that leaves them at least with more man days or less reserve force members who are struggling with the man days that now have been reduced. This is what I've just explained. SAMS continues to call up health professionals like we saw with Opsnotlela in the pandemic. Most of the nurses that were assisting our civilian hospitals were retired nurses. Even in our own hospital in 1 mil, we had retired nurses that we had to call up. Next slide, please. The challenges continue. We have very limited leader group in the reserve force. We used to have a program that is called University Reserve Training Program, URTP, where services will go to universities in our attempt to professionalize the military, so that the military is not known to be a department where only people who do not want to go to school go to. Services used to go to universities and recruit professionals. I know legal used to do it, the Air Force aviation engineers, they used to do it, and then they will be part of the reserve force component because they will be studying full-time. When they are on holidays, they will come to do their training, then they will be socializing to the reserve, into the military. Once they graduate, then they became reserve force members. Some of them were even working, but they continued to be reserve force members. But now, most of the services can no longer continue with this program because of the reduction in man days. We have very restricted continuation training. This I also explained in December. With the reduced man days, most environments, they call up their reserve force members for utilization. But now if you have less man days to call up people now are doing a balancing act. Do I call up my members, reserve force members, to utilize them, or do I call them for continuation training? But the danger in that, if you just call up people without continuation training, it will show in the operations or in them implementing their duties. Because in the military, you require continuous training so that you keep up with whatever it is that you have to provide. If you don't, then it will show. This is why we're pleading that at least we should be assisted in keeping the reserve force members that we have and the mandates that we have, because if not, then we're running a risk of deploying people that don't have sufficient training. And remember, the reserve force members are a force multiplier. They augment the regular force members. If training is not the same, then it will show and it will compromise operations. So this is what we are trying to avoid. Also, we remember I mentioned the Defense Reserve Support Boards. What we do in these boards also is to seek reskilling for our reserve force members, so that those that can apply for alternative employment. But the truth of the matter is that most of our reserve force members are struggling to compete in the civilian world. The labor market, we know in our country, we're suffering the most from structural unemployment. There are many graduates in South Africa, but they do not meet the requirements or demands of the labor market. So with our reserve force members, it's even worse. Hence, we have this relationship where we will seek reskilling for our reserve force members, so that even if they don't have to go and seek employment, maybe they obtain a skill that will enable them to be self-sufficient, do something, maybe something like carpentry, or plumbing, anything that is in demand that a person can make a living out of. This is one of the things that we try for our reserve force members. Next slide, please. This is just the statistics for you members of the committee to see. Next slide, please. Continued the challenges. this is the one first concept. I think that the number 5 is it's our internal thing. I don't have to bore the committee with. One first concept, meaning that regular force members, reserve force members, when they are on call up, they should be treated as their regular force counterpart. We continue to define this concept. I don't think I still want to speak on the first design and the first structure, but what I wanted to say is that the culture of the militaries is that the size of the reserve force component will be determined by the size of the military. Hence, I was pleading that if we're going to have a lean military, we can't at the same time simultaneously reduce the number of the regular force members while reducing the number of the reserve force members, especially when we feel that the insecurity is heightened in the country, because we will have to respond and we will not have time to provide a combat-ready force if both forces are reduced at the same time. That is some sort of a security risk on its own. There is a need in the department to develop the 4 types of the reserves: conventional one that provides such capability like the infantry does in the army; immediate deployable capability that supplements the regulars like we do with Operation Corona and other operations, because now even in the operation in Mozambique, we have a couple of reserves there. The Mzansi Home Guard, this is the army idea of having localized reserve that will assist with intelligence, specialized capability, like I've already said, in the Air Force's pilots and aviation engineers. Army also has a spool of specialists, and SAMS has surgeons and the nurses that it calls up. So I think with all that we've said, the business case for the reserves is, but there's a belief that it's not visible to all. But I think according to the presentation, the committee can now see the business case of having the reserve force component in the department. Next slide, please. Challenges continue. Huge lack of resources for non-infantry units and loss of critical mass in other causes. For an example, artillery, ADA, armor engineer, and support units, especially the Technical Service Corps. These are the other units who have raised the need for reserve force members, but they don't have sufficient mandates or even the structure to have reserve force members, but there is a requirement. There was a ministerial task team report that was conducted and launched last year. There were problems that were found with the administration of the reserves, where it pointed out there are certain things in the administration of the reserves that leaves the reserve force members vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. The division has responded to this by writing to the services and advise what we should do to try and mitigate these and minimize them as much as we can. Exclusion of reserves on internal and internal training opportunities. This I have already stated. Because of mandates, most services, they always are wary of calling up reserve force members, because they will say, what's the point of calling up a reserve force member for 6 months and then they go to course, whereas I have a requirement to utilize the reserve force members. So they will rather call them up for utilization and ignore the training. But this is the risk, because if a reserve force member does not have the same training as their regular force counterpart, and you expect to deploy these people together, then it will show, and that is a risk even to operations. Hence, we are pleading that we should be assisted in keeping the mandates that we have. For instance, the Army is trying. Chief Army has made a ruling that he will not sign and approve any course without having the 10% representative of the reserves on it. This is supposed to be the practice in the department, but it's not implemented because of the reasons that I've already mentioned. We have reserve force members that were trained, they're not being called up because we don't have sufficient mandates. And as I've already stated, that on its own is a security risk to have people who are military trained out there, desperate, without call-ups and without employment. Career management is as a result of training, because most reserve force members are not sufficiently trained. So at times they are left out when it comes to promotion. You'll find out that the reserve force member will be on the same rank for 10 or more years because they don't have the courses that are required for them to progress in ranks. We're struggling with the rejuvenation of the reserves. We have a very aging reserve force component. I think the average age has just moved from 42 to about 44 or 45. It's difficult to rejuvenate if we can't call up reserve force members, or if we can't get those MSDS members who did not get service corps contract to join the reserves because of mandates. Also, at times, it's difficult for them to go through concurrent health assessment that one has to go through before they are called up, because some environments, they state that they don't have enough mandates to call them up and have them go through trial, which at times can take up to 10 days. And this affects the fitness or combat readiness of the reserve force members. Next slide. This have already stated that we have 40% of the reserve force members augmenting their regular force members in the borders, Ops Corona borders with the Mozambique. This is the business case, as I've stated. They provide this, but the budget that is spent on them is less than 10%, only 7.6, even though they provide almost half of the capability that is required in the Operation Corona. And then there's Project Kobatlala that deals with agriculture and contributes to the developmental agenda of the country. And these are the courses that some of our reserve force members have been trained on, and some of them are now deployed, and they're using the skills of water and water purification. And with this, a person can even have a water shop. Like I said, that some of the courses can give them the ability to be self-sufficient when they are not on called up, as this would be the case for most reserves with effect from 1st April, because, for instance, now the Air Force has reduced the mandates from 16 to 12 days. So that means a member will be called up only less than half days a month. And this does not only end there, then it means this, because these are people with families as well. These wages provides for the livelihood of their families. So it means a person now also will be taking a cut on their salary. We also have reserve force members who are mechanics, who assist in fixing our cars, chaplains who deployed with operations. Next slide, please. In conclusion, confirm strategic purpose of reserves and reprioritize the roles of the reserve force member. I think we can confirm the strategic purpose of the reserve. They are force multiplier. They augment the regular force members, and there is definitely a need for a reserve force component in the department. But now we are saying confirm because the numbers of the reserves, as it was shown earlier, is getting leaner and leaner, and the budget for the mandates is also getting reduced to a point where we might find ourselves with half of our reserves, depending on how many of those will still stay behind and say, I can still live with the 12 days because I don't have any other alternative. We might lose some if they manage to get alternative employment. This is what we need to do if we can have the opportunity. We need to develop 4 types of reserve force members: the conventional ones that serve as such capability, especially in the army, for operations like Operation Prosper and Ops Kotlela, as we saw last year. Also to have those that are immediate deployable capability. For instance, the operation in Mozambique has been extended now, and chances are it will continue to be extended. So the company that is there will need to be rotated because we have a reserve force company there. So we need to have immediate deployable capability so that if the company that is there is rotated, we can send another company of reserves. There's Mzansi Home Guard that the Army has not launched, that they felt through the environmental scan that there is a need of having reserve force members that will assist with intelligence, localized intelligence, specialist capabilities that are used in the Air Force with their pilots, aviation engineers, surgeons in the SAMs, and professional nurses that we at times call also the pool of specialists that the Army has. We also, there is an urgent need to address our aging force. Like I've said, the age of our average reserve force member is now rising from 42 to 45, and that's not an ideal age for a soldier. But this is not easy because the mandates are getting smaller. So that means the number of reserves is also getting smaller. It's difficult now to recruit the younger members like we used to in the past because we no longer have sufficient mandates. We need to have a feeder system, as currently we don't. We're no longer getting many members from the MSDS like we used to, who would become part of our reserve force members. Also, the URTP program that I told you about, where we used to go and recruit reserve force members in university, we no longer do that because the services have no sufficient mandates to do that. So this affects the rejuvenation of our reserve force component. We need to manage limitation on mandates. Like I've said, this has an adverse effect on the future utilization of the reserve force members in the department. Like now, some services have reduced the numbers. When it started, like maybe 5 years ago, this is a reserve force member who used to be called out for 30 or 31 days, which is a full month's salary. We understand that military is a service, it's not a job, but even though it's a service, all of us, we do get an incentive of a salary at the end of the month as regular force members. So even for reserve force members, they do get wages, they rely on it for the livelihood of their families. So you can imagine a person who used to get a full salary 5 years ago is now getting only a 12 days salary, but they are still here and serving. So we're just pleading with the committee that we are assisted in maintaining and keeping the reserve force complement that we have, because I think it's very modest. It's not a huge number as stated in the defense review. And if you look at the number of our regular force members, one can agree that the number that we have of reserve force members is very modest, and we should be assisted in keeping and maintaining it. Failing which, we might not be able to respond to the security requirements of the country, and we don't want to find ourselves in that situation. Next slide. We would like to increase continuation training so that our reserve force members remain combat ready. With the current reduction, this is not possible, and if it continues, it's going to compromise operations. We will also need to go back to enhance our leader group development like we used to in the past through programs like URTP. We're pleading with all the services to adhere to the 10% representativity on courses and start a state expense so that we can ensure that our reserve force members remain combat ready and are developed in par with their regular force counterparts. We will continue as a department defining the one force concept and implement it fairly and consistently. We will support career management of the reserves as they are also professional soldiers. We'll continue to reskill and seek reskilling opportunities for our reserve force members like we continue to do as the division. We will continue to implement measures to protect reserve force members from abuse, as we did when we responded to the ministerial task team that was performed and launched last year. Next slide. I think we do know and understand that the financial situation in the country, it is what it is, and we don't see it improving in the near future. Hence, we are not requesting for the number of reserves that the defense review milestone 1 and 2 say we should have, because they're saying we should have 40% representation of reserves in relation to regular force members. We just know that that is impossible. We're just pleading to keep the component that we have, which is far less than 20%. We think it's modest and it's required by the security concerns and by the number of regular force members that we have. Fair and consistent application of the one force concept. This is one thing that we continue to plead for. Currently, I'm in the process of revising the reserve force strategy so that we really go on to define the one force concept, because it's stated in the military strategy, stated in the defense review, but the implementation continue to be inconsistent, but this is work in progress. There is a need for a reserve force in Indaba 2. We had reserve force in Indaba where we discussed reserve force issues with the previous minister. And then we had last year in Indaba 1.5 with the Reserve Force Council, where the reserve force issues were deliberated on, but we really feel that there is a need for Indaba 2 with the development currently, so that we can see where we're moving with the reserves in the department. I think this should be the end of, next slide, but I think it's the end of the presentation. My closure, Ops Notlela, where we were assisting the country to manage the pandemic, and Ops Proper, where we were assisting the police with the uprisings, proved that the SANDF cannot conduct any operation without being augmented by the reserves as the force multiplier, because they were part of all the operations. Currently in Mozambique, they are also part of that operation. We have a company of reserve force members there. So I think that is the end of my presentation, Chairperson. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, General. Well-argued case. Standing presentation. DM, maybe even before I ask the members to comment, you may want to augment the presentation from your visit to your experience arising from the visit to the various provinces. Admiral Kubu is also in the meeting. He may want to say one or two things before I open it up to the meeting. Thank you very much, General. Thanks. Yeah.
Pleasure, sir.
My apologies, DM was probably, he was not ready. Are you ready?
Okay. You wanted me to come in, sorry, Chair, just as a misunderstanding there. I'm sorry.
Okay, DM, let me
Chairperson.
Yes, DM. I was saying that if you want to some few minutes before you come in, yes. I was going to call Admiral Kubu just to comment because she's in the meeting. Okay. Maybe let me invite Admiral Kubu. You'll come up immediately after him. General Kubu, any comment of a general nature arising from the presentation? Anything you want to add or to highlight even before we let members deliberate on the presentation? Admiral is in trouble. I think he's facing a serious challenge. Okay, I think he's facing a serious challenge. DM will discount him for now.
Thank you very much, Chair. Admiral Kubu should be allowed to come in still when he has reconnected. And you are right, Chair, that I should have allowed him to speak first to augment the report. I think he is insisting on speaking.
No,
Come through.
let's do this. You are right here.
Yeah.
Can the host disable him? Because I understand there is no connection between us and him. And then someone calls him on the side. General Niaba, if you could call him on the side to say we have disabled him because there was this connectivity problem, and ask him to reconnect.
Yes, sir, that's exactly what I'm doing.
Thank
That's
you so
exactly
much.
what I'm doing. I'm calling him now.
Thank you
Okay,
so much. Over to you, dear.
Chairperson, thank you very much, and to committee members, thank you very much. General Niabo has made a very good presentation, Chair and members of the committee. And specifically, I want to direct you to the long list of challenges that she shared with us in the presentation. I'm going to go back to some of those, I'll touch on some of those challenges, but let me just start by saying at a high level, honorable members, our reserve system, it's a residual, meaning it consists of the remnants of what is left of the SANDF legacy during the Bush War years in this country. A system which was maintained to provide for reserve soldiers, relying on the conscription policy that was there. And whereas we repositioned the defense organization, our defense establishment in 1994, and in policy said the reserves will be part of our armed forces going forward, there was never sufficient thought around how the new reserves are going to be organized and how they are going to be sourced in the absence of a conscription system. So partly, that has actually led to what General Niabo has referred to, which is an organization which is dying. It is dying not only in relation to the age cohort, average age cohort of our reserves, but also even in relation to its infrastructure. Almost every center, or let me say base, where our reserves are accommodated is in a state of complete dereliction. It's derelict, it's dilapidated. That is the one point which I think at the high level, the Joint Standing Committee on Defense must appreciate that we have a concept that says the country must keep relatively modest levels of armed forces, but provide for that surge capability that the general was talking about, the ability to expand the force levels when the need arises. We must, as leadership, deal with this matter for real. I think the point that the general kept coming back to, a case for the reserves, a case for the reserves. It's important that as ourselves, as leadership, the Joint Standing Committee on Defense must raise public awareness of this, that deliberately in policy we said let money be moved to other areas of government need. We'll keep a modest defense force, but that modest defense force should not compromise the security and sovereignty of the country. We must be able to increase the numbers when the need arises to the level that is warranted. The other point, which relates to this point, that the reserves we almost are treating them as a good to have, or not good, but nice to have. we are treating our reserves as a nice to have organization of soldiers, whereas it is actually part of the fundamental things we must have. And as the general was saying, increasingly, with the different functions and duties the Defense Force must perform domestically for the different call-ups that recently have come about, but also even for external deployment, we are increasingly relying on our reserves. If people do not understand us, to simplify the matter is just to say to them, half of the troops that are responsible for borderline function, border security, are the reserves, half of them, 40 to 50%. And then they'll appreciate that it means without the reserves, we don't even have soldiers to send for borderline security. Of Ops Notela, when the COVID pandemic hit us, over a third of the troops that were deployed were the reserves. So you can see that without the reserves, we actually do not have, the capacity to execute functions that are expected of our defense force. Now, here is the issue. Precisely because we are dealing with our reserves as a nice to have, the standard of this organization, when you look at what is happening procedures-wise and practices-wise of the different, or at the different bases of our reserves, you can see that there is still a lot that is informed by the origins of these reserves. Because some of the reserves, for instance, like the Tshwane reserves, you get a sense that no, as the reserves, that Tshwane reserves a command post was actually a command post of the commandos. And the SANDF had the commandos, but it had also the citizen force. In their purpose and utilization, these two, the commandos and the citizen force, were two different organizations for different purposes. But those origins, you can still see them. When you look at the infrastructure, for instance, of the Tshwane reserves, which is the commandos, it's almost like, it's a makeshift thing for those who were just interested and, happy to assist the military. Not that the military had established infrastructure for the accommodation and preparation of the soldiers the way the citizen force in other places would have been prepared. Of course, the other point that has been raised is that as a result of us dealing with the reserves as a residual, something that remains of what was there is no feeder system into our reserves that is clear, targeted for purposes of keeping citizens who are militarily proficient to be utilized at any time. That feeder system is not there. So we need to address that as well. The general has raised a point which I feel we should also take note of, which is that these reserves, we need now to approach them with a relatively clearer purpose of where and how they must be utilized. Because She says we must prepare conventional reserves or reserve for conventional functions, meaning we must prepare reserves having in our minds the soldiers that must be called up when the need to ratchet up the numbers of the defense force arises, meaning they must have the proficiency of any other soldier who's in the regular force. But we now need, as it is suggested by the Reserve Force Council, what they are referring to as Mzansi Home Guards. In the previous period after 94, the need for the Mzansi Home Guard was not there was no sharp case for them, for these soldiers who, in terms of their organization and their deployment, it's more linked to where they come from, their places of abode, where they live. That is arising now because we now have domestically instability. Domestically, we now have a real possibility of insurgency activities. And it would be economic to have soldiers who are geographically deployed or organized in order to provide the assurance and the comfort that the military is available everywhere where it is needed. So there is a need for that kind of a consideration, this Mzansi Home Guard. I must confess that I personally was one of those who took long to be won over to this Mzansi Home Guard because it represented almost to me what we have in the commandos. But now with the instability we have and possibility of insurgency activities, but also of terrorism in the country, that may actually be an intervention the defense force would benefit from. The other point about our reserves, of course, is that the equipment of the reserves, the bases are in a very poor condition. And I can say, because I'm speaking to the leadership of our defense sector, the Joint Standing Committee, that is looking at things all round, as leaders, we cannot fail to be embarrassed by the conditions under which we are calling up citizens to execute onerous responsibilities that our soldiers are performing. We cannot. It's a big indictment on us. I happen to be one of those citizens who were in the liberation armies, and I know the ratchet conditions under which guerrilla armies live in and what we had to make do with. But I will not accept that this should be conditions under which citizens of a conventional standing force must be subjected to. Totally unacceptable. There are no vehicles. You have a whole base without a single car that is moving. I do understand that in relation to weaponry, we have a problem, and it's got to do with the budget, the budgeting, the provision of resources for our defense function. Our war weapon systems are deployed as prime mission equipment in the theater of war, where we are deployed. That's where our weapon systems are utilized, because that's what we can afford. What we can buy systems-wise is what we provide soldiers to fight with. But things being equal conventionally, we needed those very same weapon systems to be available for the relief group that is being prepared to relieve the one that is deployed, and still have the same weapon systems available for the training of those who you are preparing to execute the same responsibilities. So what I'm saying is the weapon systems that we have, they are mothballed only to be used for fighting. But for preparation, continuous training that we are talking about that the reserves must do, they largely have to rely on theory. And I think it's something which we need to look into as the Joint Standing Committee on Defense. And if you have soldiers that are not adequately and professionally prepared, you know what the outcome and the results of that is. You send soldiers who are not sufficiently prepared into war, then you know what to expect. So we're carrying a lot of responsibility as the Joint Standing Committee on Defense with respect to the conditions of our reserves. Not all is doom and doom, honorable members. There is one base of our reserves that I visited, and when members have time, they can visit it because it's in Cape Town. It's called Fort Ikapa. At Fort Ikapa, the leadership of the defense implemented what was a model or the ideal arrangement that we should have infrastructure-wise and how the reserves must be prepared for. For us to succeed, it means that what the South African Defence Force is doing at National Defence Force is doing at Fort Ikapa must be replicated in all the other regions of the country where we have the basis of the region. Because that is a decent camp, is a decent center of a force that is in reserve for deployment. Its preparation, its state of mind and everything. But it is only in one command center, and that is Fort Ikapa. In other areas, the challenge is it's very clear. That's what, Chair, I would want to impress sentimentally to the committee members just to understand the state of our reserves today. With that said, Chair, let me submit and step down. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, DM. You have augmented the case very well. And coming from a person of your level, it makes the case even more serious in my view. The General said we must restore the dignity of the reserves. And you conclude by saying, as leadership, including this committee, we carry a lot of responsibility with respect to the state of the reserve force. And then you go to town explaining what you found on the ground. Conditions you would not wish even for your, not wish for anyone that are not fit for a force that would provide such capability to our military, to the regular force. Okay, well said. Colleagues, the issues are now on the table. Thank you very much, colleagues, I don't see I'm now looking at the screen just to check if there are any hands to make a comment. I see Mr. Shelembe. Mr. Shelembe, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. one must appreciate the presentation done by General, and also, the input from the Deputy Minister. Chairperson, if one, is listening and thinking what is currently happening in the world, one gets a question that the mandate or the responsibility that is given to the Department of Defense, it is to ensure that the safety of our country, we as citizens, our boundaries, should we experience, any war whatsoever, are we ready, or do we have the capacity or capability? Chairperson, why I'm asking that is because if you look at the challenges that we have, if you look like, say, those, departments, or entities that are working within the department are experiencing something that one, cannot, convince the people that we are representing that they are protected. Now, Chairperson, we must agree that, the intention to have, the reserve force is to improve, our combat potential, to ensure that, everything, is done accordingly. But listening, to the input by the minister, deputy minister, it is telling us that we are nowhere when it comes to the issue of combat ready, and also, in terms of capability in our situation. Jefferson, I don't know who to ask, because if I listen, to the presentation from the general, it's clear that actually having a problem herself because of just the budget. I'm not sure whether, it's really the budget, Chairperson, whether we are failing to use what we have. Because, Chairperson, if we keep on complaining, but we can't, even use what we have accordingly, I don't think, Chairperson, we can say we are doing justice. Chairperson, looking, to the issue of, say, the reserve force that we have seems to be not, getting, what they need, they must have, like in terms of training. But I don't see even a clear plan when it comes to getting people who have some sort of employment where they make income, but at the same time being able to assist, in the reserve, in the in when they are needed. See, if say we had maybe some or many people of such, we could say at least when we need something, we do have. So it means now we don't, have anything. I was going to ask the question, Chairperson, what will be the impact, of, when it comes to the significant of, the reserve force being available. But now, if you look at the decrease, it tells us even that program now of the MSDS that they are not, promising that there's going to be any, intake that will address the current situation. So it means now the MSDS now is not going to be, of helping. If you look now, the issue is, is the budget, which is, Chairperson. I also, stated that, at the meeting we have, with the minister, that if the issue of the budget is not, addressed and agreed upon between the department and the National Treasury, or if, the issue of the budget restructuring is not attended to as a matter of urgency, to see how do we prioritize, our available resources to ensure that, whatever that we do is going to assist in defending and protecting our country and the citizen. Chairperson, that question, I don't think there's going to be anyone who will, answer when it comes to the issue of the military skills development system, because now there's no money. But the impact of that is going to be very, very serious. And Chairperson, maybe the question that let me close by asking that question. There is a problem about the calling up of the reserve force members when they are needed. Like say a call up cycle of the reserve. Chairperson, I just want to know if they can, what system is used to ensure that, what is happening or whatever is rumors that it happened, some of the reserve force members, they are now demoralized because they feel some of them are being called often, whereas some, are not being called. When it comes to that call up, cycling for members to come up. If maybe they can assist me on that. But Chairperson, maybe the presentation is clear. Even the Deputy Minister has also, stated. So the only solution that we need to look at now, how are we getting, the budget that will address these issues? Is it possible to reprioritize, or we start from the issue of like a zero budgeting, where we say, let's start from the fresh now and see how do we prioritize, the budget in the department. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shelembe, Mr. Motle, and then Ms. Honorable Motle, and then Honorable Motlap.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good evening to colleagues and members on the platform. Am I audible, Chair?
Yes, you are, sir. You may go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. Chair, I think let me start by welcoming the presentation. One, I think Honorable Shelembe has emphasized on the issue of budget, and we know its implication on what has been presented here. The same applies to regular forces or the South African National Defence Force. It's a matter that we assist with. I don't want to get into that. My challenge is one, Chair. The presentation also speaks to the force design and structure, because I think the reserve force, as correctly outlined there, it's an extension of the regular force in times of need. We rely on them to be called up and to play that particular role in assisting the regular forces. So they are a very important component, and there is a reason why we should have a reserve force as outlined. I think the structure should and the design should outline in terms of the regular force, because if you can recall, we still have challenges in terms of numbers. The numbers of the regular force and the number of the reserve force. An ideal situation from the structure should depict an ideal situation to say we'll have a force that is formidable when we have this number of regular force and this number of what do you call them, reserve force, so that at least even when we engage on the issue of advocate and lobby for more budget, this should be inclusive. It should not be, the focus should not be only on the regular forces. It should also include the reserve forces going forward. I think this presentation has given us that insight of what is it that we must now integrate into this campaign of demanding or lobbying for more funding for the defense force. Overall, Chair, I think these are the issues that we are seized with, and we must continue to engage with to find a resolve to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thabo, I now realize that it was a mistake for us not to invite the acting chief of the reserve force to be to attend the meeting we had with the top brass of the defense force yesterday to discuss the issue of force design and force structure. And you see, because we should understand the issue of the force design and force structure within the concept of a one force, within the one force concept. Looking at both the size and composition. The presentation yesterday, Admiral Kobo is in the meeting, focused largely, in fact exclusively, on the equipment that is preferred going into the future. And there was nothing on the actual composition, the personnel, the personnel of the defense force, taking into account the one force concept. Now, it means that is an issue in my view that we need to revisit as a team. We said due to time yesterday, we're limited, our discussion was limited by time. We adjourned the discussion to sometime in June. Again, another closed meeting that will be held in Parliament. I think we need to invite the reserve force to come and do this presentation, so that, of course, to be added at this meeting, so that we have a holistic view of the force, both in terms of the regular and the reserves. Looking now at the role of the reserves in augmenting the things that DM spoke about are a shocker in my view. The challenges that the general presented are a shocker. You see, a person would think that we are treating them like the reserves like a stepchild. Yet they play a central role in the defense of our country. I think that's what is central in the presentation of both the DM and the general. Honorable Motapo, I'm coming to you now. The platform is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairperson. Am I audible?
Yes, you are, sir. Sorry, yes,
thank you. Thank you, Chairperson, and good evening to colleagues, Deputy Minister, General, and your colleagues and Parliament staff. Chairperson, I've got two issues to raise here. The first one is relating to what is called RTP. When General was presenting it, to me, it sounded to be a good program, because it was allowing the newly qualified graduates to acquire skill and experience. Now, I want to know why was it discontinued? And then the second one is relating to RFC, Reserve Force Council. Let me echo your sentiments, Chairperson, because according to me, the law doesn't allow a vacuum. And Deputy Minister Makwetla has informed this committee that they received, as ministry, they received several cautions from the then chair to say their term is coming to an end, but nothing was done. So it appears as of now, there is no interim structure, and personally, I don't know how far the department is with filling in of these positions, RFC positions. So I propose that, Chairperson, maybe as this committee, we mandate you to take this matter forward with the ministry to ensure that there is compliance in this regard. I think those are the only two issues. And like my colleagues have said, I welcome the presentation and additions by the Deputy Minister and was it Kunu or yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Matapo. Okay, there are no more hands. Tabo, is this in your hand or in all hand?
An old hand, Chair.
Okay, no, thank you so much. Honorable General Niaba, before I ask you to respond.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I actually requested you to present the leadership structure of the reserve force. Maybe, and also brief us on value addition. We have the Reserve Force Council, I think it's been in office for 4 or 5 years. Now, looking at the collapse, the deterioration that you have been referring to, both yourself and the DM, what is the responsibility of the Reserve Council? So if you could just deal with that in terms of value addition, so that I understand when I insist on them being appointed, that this is how they are helping us deal with the challenges that you have pointed out. But the DM will also talk to that as well. Maybe before I call you to respond, and then later at DM, let me, Admiral, are you in the meeting? Hello, Admiral?
I'm sorry, Chair. He's not, Chair. He keeps on losing network, Chair. I keep on admitting and then he keeps on losing network.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes, Chair.
All right. So then maybe let's leave it at that for now. So did call him in at another point. Anyway, the discussions are continuing. It's good we received presentation.
I'm back, sir.
Who's back?
General Niabo. I was disconnected a bit there.
Oh, you were disconnected. Okay. No, it's fine. No. We
Yes, sir.
Admiral Kum is not in the meeting, so I will not bother asking him to deal with to contribute or make a comment, one or two comments. I will consider.
Can I now respond?
Yes, I will ask you to respond once you are done, I'm not too sure if you heard my addition that you talk to the leadership structure as well as the role of the council. I think you were still in the meeting when I was asking you to touch on that as well. Once you are done, I'll ask the DM to then give us his closing comments as well. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. Am I now audible?
Yes, you are, ma'am. Audible. You are audible.
Okay. Okay, Chairperson. Chief Defence Reserve, the division where I'm acting on, it is the division that is in charge of the reserve force in the South African National Defence Force. We report to Chief of the South African National Defence Force when it comes to all the reserve force issues. We provide strategic direction for the reserves and we formulate policies for the reserves for the whole department. Then in the services, we have director of reserves. Those are brigadiers who are reporting to chief of the services like Chief Army, Chief of the Air Force, Chief Navy. In the division, there is a chief director, which was previously General Anderson, who has been retired now for almost a year. I'm acting in his place. I'm the only general in the division currently. I have 4 SSOs, full colonels who report to me. One is responsible for policy, one is responsible for support, one is responsible for promoting and marketing the reserves. And then the other one is responsible for all the projects that we do for the reserve. So currently, I'm the only Brigadier General at Defense Headquarters in Defense Reserve Division that is responsible for reserves. I sit in the Military Command Council, all the command bodies. I sit in the Plenary Defense Staff Council because I provide strategic direction for the reserves and we formulate policies. The RFC, they advise the minister with all issues regarding the reserves. Also, when we formulate policies, we consult with them.
Okay.
And make sure that they are always kept abreast of all reserves issues in the department. But the defense reserves, which the post I'm acting on, report to the chief. All things that are for the reserves in the department, they fall within that division where I
don't know, has she disappeared again? Caused? She's still in the meeting.
I am so
yes, you were muted.
sorry. I think the computer kicked me out again. Am I now
Yes, you are audible.
I'm struggling with my Wi-Fi.
No, you are audible. You may continue.
Yes, sir. So I'm acting Chief Defense Reserves. That division, I'm the only general currently and until General Anderson's successor is appointed. So the RFC reports to the minister. They advise the minister with regard to reserve force issues. We report to Chief of the South African National Defence Force. We provide strategic direction for the reserves throughout the department to other services and to the department at large. And at times we also advise the minister because we're the one who are formulating policies in consultation with the reserves, with the Reserve Force Council. But the policies are formulated by us, or the day-to-day interaction with the services as to how the reserves should be managed is done by us. So that I don't know whether I am covered, you Chairperson, when it comes to the structure. Should I now respond to the questions that I noted?
Yes, please, I am covered.
Should I now respond to the questions that I noted, sir, from the other members of the committee?
Yes, please go ahead.
The first one that I wrote down will help me with the ones that I could not pick up. What has been done to manage corruption in the reserves? We were given the report, ministerial task team report that was done. And then we took out all the issues that pointed out to the reserves. Then we realized that in our trying to deal with the reserves, we wrote to the services and said that the call-up administration of reserves should not be left to one person like it was in the past, maybe director reserves in the service or a colonel who will be SSO reserve. We said they should have call-up committees to eliminate the possibility of exploitation and abuse, because when there are two people and then there are allegations that the person who said, because there were allegations like I was told that if you want to call up, this is what you need to do, or they were compelled to pay bribe. So we said if there are call-up committees constituting of 5 members or more, at least we're trying to eliminate that. Because in a call-up committee, you'll have clearly defined requirements of the post as to why or how a member must be called up, and then there'll be minutes, it will be recorded. So we felt that is going to eliminate corruptions and the allegations of abuse and all the things that we pick up from the report. And continuously, I'm chairing the Defense Reserve Board as acting chief defense reserves, where we monitor that the services continue to implement all these measures that we said should be implemented to try and manage the corruption in the reserves. Yeah, and the second member asked, what is the ideal component instead of pleading for what I am saying we should be assisted to maintain what we have. Reserve force component should be 40% of the regular force, of the whole force structure actually. Reserve force component should be the 40% of the military structure. That is a practice the world over. Milestone 1 and 2 of Defense Review also said we should have 40% reserve force component. Currently, we have less than 20%, the one that we are struggling to maintain. The third one, why was URTP discontinued? URTP, ma'am, has not been discontinued, but the implementation is problematic because the services cannot afford it. It's still there. We have few members that we have recruited in the past, but it's not really continuing, but not officially discontinued. It's the services are saying it's difficult to continue with it with the budget that we have, and especially now with the further 25% reduction. So they can't afford now to continue with it, but it's still the program that we have. If the financial situation in the department improves, then we will continue because we believe in continuing with professionalizing our reserve force component and the military at large. Those are the only 3 that I know, the chairperson. If there's anything that I didn't hear, then you can help me with it. Thank you, sir.
Okay. No, thanks. Thank you very much, colleagues. DM, let me just ask you to comment because the input of the colleagues were largely comments than specific questions that need answers, except 2 or 3. Over to you, DM.
Chairperson, thank you once again, and to committee members. And thank you for the information shared by General Niabo. Let me just say, Chair, that the observations that the members have made, they are all of them correct. And let me just touch them as the members were raising them, starting with the Honorable Member Shilembe. It is true, Honorable Chair, that we are going to have to tighten up the belt as far as being very stringent in controlling the way resources are used by the Defense Force. Because for very obvious reasons that committee members know, when you look at just the leakages that happened, money is lost in the renovation of 1 Mill Hospital. And I can go on and on and on. So there is a huge difference we can make as the Defense Force if we insist on all of us appreciating every rand that we get for our defense function. That's the first thing to say. Yes, there is a lot of room as far as I'm concerned, a lot of room. However, we must also appreciate that what we are talking about here in relation to the reserves, we're not only talking about providing infrastructure, the resources that we need for this organization, but we also are talking salaries, what is referred to here there as man days, the budget for man days, which we have cut from 2.6 million to 1.9 million. That budget, there is not even a question of, there are no leaks. It talks to how many soldiers we are able to mobilize and deploy, that budget. And the general made the point that we will, actually not we will, we are already there. We are unable to fulfill all the force employment goals that the Defense Force must realize, because we're relying on the reserve force. And the mandates, that the budget for mandates has been slashed. So it means that there are certain things that the Defense Force cannot do simply because we do not have the soldiers in the numbers we need. Which then, you know, emphasizes the point, which is what Honorable Member Mood and yourself, Honorable Chair, you have raised. We've got to deal with the budget of the SANDF, integrating the budget of the reserves. We've got to deal with the reserves as one problem, one budget problem. Because for as long as Chair, you were suggesting that the discussion that the honorable members had yesterday did not fully integrate the needs of this other component of our organization. It's a very critical observation. It's important because the generals may talk in a way that makes us to focus on the permanent force, on the regular force. But the truth is that when they make that omission of not making you to be cited of the other organization that makes it possible for them to do the things that they are doing, then we are not going to take the right decisions. Chair, you have raised the issue about the leadership structure of the reserves, and General Niabo has responded to that. All I want to underline is this rather. What you are sensing is actually a legitimate concern. There's been an institutional imperfection in relation to how our reserves leadership-wise are handled. The Reserve Force Council, as the General is saying, is there to advise the minister. However, in its presentation, when we present it and we say to you, this South Africa's Reserve Force Council, you are likely to assume that it is the leadership of the reserves, when it is not the leadership of the reserves. And it does not appear anywhere in the chain of command or of authority on matters affecting that community, the way you would expect it to be. The reserves, South Africa's defense reserves, as the general was saying, they are controlled by the directors that are there in each one of our arms of service that are responsible for the reserve. The Army has its own director of reserves. The Navy has its own director of reserves. Similarly, SAMS and the Air Force. And those they report to, or they are in their functions under the chiefs of those services. You see, meaning it is the chief of the army who actually is the one who is deciding how the reserves must be called up and all of that, because the director there is accountable to the chief of the army. Similarly, the director of the Navy reports to the admiral and everybody else. Of course, you have the chief of the South African chief of the reserve, your General Anderson, who now is General Anderson, who is now General Niabo. General Anderson represents these directors of the different arms of service in charge of the reserve. He represents them at the Military Command Council. not the Reserve Force Council. The Reserve Force Council does not sit at the Military Command Council. The person who the Chief of the Defense Force takes more to, considers a critical functionary for the purposes of his own responsibility as the Chief of the Defense is the Chief of the Reserves, is General Anderson. It is General Miyabu because he also reports directly to the Chief of the Defense Force. So that's why there's always now and again been tension of perspectives of what the Reserve Force Council members would say and what the Chief of the Defense Reserves would say. Because the Chief of the Defense Reserve says, I'm the one who actually is dealing with the reserve, with the force, the members. It is not the Reserve Force Council. And he also does not report to the Reserve Force Council. So in the last Indaba we had, which General Niago refers to as Indaba 1.5, 1.5. He's correct because it was an incomplete story, that dialogue, it was still to be continued. But he is correct to say in that discussion, the need to create some rapprochement to bring together the Reserve Force Council and the structure that is under the Chief of the Reserves has been appreciated. My view in that discussion was that the directors of the reserves in all the four arms of services should be ex officio members of the Reserve Force Council. They must input into what the Reserve Force Council believes its policy that serves the reserves. If they're not part of that body, it does create organizationally a misfit there. I just thought I should make that point that you are right to say structurally there's been deficiencies. We have not been functioning properly. And there's been an acknowledgement of that. The last point that I want to touch is with respect to the lapse on our part to reconstitute the Reserve Force Council. We will certainly make it a point that we move with speed to get that done. Just to say, and for no other reason, and not trying to give excuses, truth is, the minister, even before she took medical leave in January, she has been struggling to be available because genuinely her health was pinning her down. And that is why some of these things may remain, as we speak, work to be attended to. Thank you very much, Chair and honorable members.
No, thank you very much, DM. You have been very helpful on this item. Maybe colleagues, we should leave it at this for now, and because we are in discussion with with the chief, the SANDF, and the minister on the force design and force structure. As I said, DM, your apologies was not your apology was noted yesterday that it didn't focus on the personnel. It was largely on the equipment. So missing in the presentation was this one force concept where you have the regular and the army, and the irregular and the reserve force playing this complementary role. And the numbers become critical. And the issue of training becomes critical. The issue of preparation becomes critical. The issue of resourcing equipment becomes critical. The conditions in which they reside become even more critical. The period that they remain engaged in the service, engaged actively, becomes critical. So those are matters that both yourself, and the general pointed at. That if those issues are not addressed, we will have the reserve force remaining in name only. She says it's a risk to engage people who have not been fully, prepared, to engage people in an action, real action, if they've not been fully prepared and fully trained. You said in some cases, even the training on the equipment they are going to use remains a theory until they get the actual deployment. So it's a serious situation that we need to pay attention to as a committee. Thank you very much for enlightening us on the role of the Reserve Force Council. In fact, I'm not too sure why we need it. Maybe in other countries they have a Reserve Force Council. If you have the Chief of the Reserves, I thought part of his responsibility is to advise the minister, to advise the president, and to advise the chief of the defense force. And other than that, I don't see how the advice that comes from people from the side to actually assist the body, reserve force. I don't know. The issue remains the interface between the Reserve Force Council and the Reserve Force Council and the Reserve Force itself, so that they don't send a parallel message to the minister, to the chief, well, to the minister in the main, and therefore to the president. There must be one message that goes right up to the top, so that we don't send different signals. We don't have a council that looks after the defense force, or rather a defense force council, or let me say a regular force council. But we have a reserve force council. I don't know how it was conceived and why it was conceived and the value it's adding to the whole thing. But by law, we have it, so we must fill those positions. Colleagues, I think the information for tonight was sufficient. I think DM played a critical role. Firstly, in going to the basis, checking out what it's obtaining on the ground, and coming to us and I'm sure to the minister as well, and to the chief, presenting his own experiences. I think they are very helpful. And on that note, DM, I will thank you, and I will thank the General Niaba for her presentation today. And we will advise when we meet again physically. It will be in Cape Town when we deal with the budget. Because we thought these issues that we are debating, these issues that we are discussing, must find articulation in the budget that we will be approving for 2022-2023. It may be late to influence the budget, now, but certainly it will influence the future budgets. DM, thank you very much for your contribution. And Niaba, thank you very much.
Can I say something, sir?
Yes.
Just to respond to the DM, since we started, because we always accompany him to these visits, all the structural deficiencies that we pick up in this reserve force unit, we've started since last year with the budget that we have. Before we can return it, we make sure that we renovate. one reserve force unit at a time. We're busy now with Tswana Regiment. We did the one in Mpumalanga where we visited, and we saw reserve force ladies who were taking showers in areas that were open. If you are walking by, you were able to see them. We rebuilt that structure. Now we're busy with Tswana Regiment, who would be done if it was not for procurement processes that are slow. So with all the reserve force units, we've told them with the visits that we made with the DM that anything that we can do to improve their conditions, we will assist. So we do that with our budget every financial year since I've been acting.
Yeah, but
Thank you.
You're not telling us why it took the DM's visit for you to attend to basic things such as the where women soldiers take bath. I mean, you see, but let's leave it at that for now, because the issues are very glaring. They've been left unattended for far too long. All right, but we'll discuss that during the budget meeting. Colleagues, is anything maybe that I'm omitting on this discussion? I just want us to move forward, but I would hear whether you have anything to say. Colleagues, anything to say? All right, doesn't look like there's anything. DM, your final word as you part.
Chairperson, once again, to yourself and members of the committee, thank you very much for your time and for allowing us to share information around the South African Reserves Organization. The questions that you have raised, Chair, are legitimate observations. You are right. In relation to the Reserve Force Council, there are matters which, when we come back with our final proposal on how the Reserve Force system must function going forward, we must find answers in those submissions. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, DM. Okay, colleagues, thank you very much. You are free to leave. DM, General, you are free to leave. We now move to the next item.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. That item will be presented by Peter Daniels. It's on our annual performance plan.
Good evening, Chair and members. Chair, can you see the presentation? Hello, Chair, can you see the presentation?
No, yeah, it's uploading. Let's wait for a minute or two. Yes, I can see it now. That's not the presentation you are doing. Is this the no? What is this? Is this the one that you are presenting, Peter?
Yes, Chair. This is the annual report of the Joint Standing Committee for 2021, Chair.
Oh, okay. Let me remove this thing, man. Okay. Okay. No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. This presentation basically follows up on what we did last week with regards to the review of our annual performance plan. And this annual report is a requirement from the House Chairperson that we should annually present to the House Chairperson. The first grey block from A to F is just basically a summary of what the annual report entails. And there we see it's a reflection on the committee program for the year 2021. And there members can see that we've considered various issues with regards to the letters from the president. There are about 6 of them. And then the second point is we've covered the NCACC's annual report as well as the quarterly reports. We also had a meeting with the South African defense industry where we had NDIC, AMD, and the NCACC as well as the NEL and Arms Corps. Members will be aware that we've concluded our strategic plan and our annual performance plan last year. There was also letters from General Olomisa There were responses from the minister, the then minister, and the former secretary, and there was also legal opinion in this regard. They also had a meeting with the Chief of Human Resources with regards to gender parity and youth development. And then in July, there was also an oversight visit by the two committees to KZN and Gauteng with regards to the unrest in July. Chair, just for some of the focus areas that we've covered last year is firstly the progress with regards to the military veterans database, and that was done on 13 May. The deployment of the SANDF to assist with maintaining law and order, as well as deployment to Mozambique. We've considered the NCACC's reports. We've considered the Defence Force Service Commission's annual activity report and made recommendations. We engaged with the department on the RAMP project and one military hospital. And then we've engaged with the defense industry role players. And then we also engaged with the Office of the Military Ombuds annual activity report. And then C, we're just basically referring to some of the key focus areas for future work. And I'll come back to that later as well. And then some of the key challenges emerging was the state of the one military hospital, specifically the RAMP. And members would recall that this report was actually drafted around the 26th of January because we had to submit it to the House chairperson. So at that stage, we didn't have that meeting. But on 17th February, we did have a presentation by Abacus on the one military hospital. And then also the implementations of the recommendations of the report. I think that is something that we need to follow up on. And then the role of the NEL in supporting the SANDFs, a current issue that we engaging with. And then one of the main issues is declining budget and the constraints placed on the Defence Force to execute this obligation. And then followed on those key challenges are just the recommendations leading from those key challenges. Chair, the next section is basically something that the members are aware of. It was both in covered in strategic session in the APP as strategic plan. And firstly, there is the mandate of the Joint Standing Committee on Defence. We then move over to the mandate of the Department of Defence, Department of Military Veterans, and there we just briefly refer to the entities that report to the committee, and that includes Arms Corps, the Council Control Board, the Office of the Military Ombud, as well as the Defence Force Service Commission and the NCACC. 1.3 is just the method of the work of the committee, and it relates to what I've said about, with regards to us receiving and considering the reports of the NCACC, letters from the President, the annual activity report from the Military Ombud and the Defence Force Service Commission. And then we must also conduct oversight visits to various military bases, etc. And then we also conduct workshops and symposiums. So then just the purpose of the report is to provide an account of the committee's work for the term 2021 and to assess key outstanding issues pertaining to oversight in the Department of Defense, military veterans, and related entities. Chair, the next page just refer briefly to some of the key statistics. And as members are aware, we had about 22 meetings in the last calendar year. In the first term, it was about 5, second term 5, third term 6, and the fourth term also 6. And then when members can see there, many of the other things we were not involved in, like the processing of legislation. There was one oversight visit that was undertaken by the committee. And then unfortunately, we haven't had any study tour yet, and it's something that we're going to discuss further. And then there were no international agreements, no any statutory appointments that were processed. There were no intervention process, no petitions, no other referrals from the speaker or the chairperson or from the House chairperson. And then we're just referring to the one letter that General Olomisha actually referred to the committee. The next one is just meetings that the committee has held in 2021. And as I mentioned earlier, there are about 22 meetings that we held. So on the left-hand column, we just say the date of the meeting, and then in the middle column, we're just referring to the agenda. And then important for us is whether those minutes were actually adopted. And as members can see, those meetings minutes were all adopted. So Chair, I've discussed this before, so I'll just scroll down and members can note the date of the meeting, the agenda item, and then here the last meeting that we had last year was on 9 December, and then was with regards to Minister on the Strategic Realignment Department with the allocated funds and alternative function options, and then the quarterly report and EUC feedback, and that minutes were adopted on the 3rd of March. Chair, with regards to the stakeholders, the various stakeholders that we've mentioned before, we had no briefings or public hearings, and legislation is not applicable to this committee. Chair, the next one section just referred to the oversight visits, and it's quite lengthy because it refers firstly in the first column to the date, the area that should be visited, what was the objective of the oversight visit, and then the recommendations. More importantly, Chair, is there on the right-hand side where we indicated that the report of this oversight visit that was conducted in July last year, which was a joint oversight visit between the Joint Standing Committee on Defence and the Portfolio Committee on Defence and Military Veterans. It was adopted on the 5th of August 2022. Sorry, that should be 2021. And then it was ATC on the 24th of August. So, Chair, here in the middle, one will note there are about 10 recommendations that the committee have made, and members are quite familiar with these, and it ranges from various issues from, referring in the BRRR process, the role of the SANDF, and they are also always being relied on in terms of extreme need, but that the budget is actually not commensurate to some of these expectations. So, Chair, there are about 10 of those recommendations that we've made.
Yeah, Glenfish.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Matsumai. Can you mute, please?
Yeah.
Matsumai, can you mute?
Yeah, I'm really good.
Host, please mute him, please. Yes,
thank you, Chair.
Yes, continue.
Thank you, Chair. Here are just some of the challenges that emerged from that oversight visit. And I think one of some of the main ones was firstly the coordination between the SANDF and the SEP, and especially provincial level in KZN, the lack of a strategic airlift capability for SAF, and then the substantial reliance on the SANDF during times of extreme need, and decreasing ability of the SANDF to meet expectations as a result of declining budget allocation. And then the fourth one, there is just a lack of a coherent and capable intelligence capability in the country, and that structures such as NICOC be optimized to ensure adequate intelligence provision for the SANDF. And then, Chair, some of the things that we said we should maybe follow up based on recommendations of the oversight report is firstly, consideration should be given to scheduling a joint debate in Parliament on the future utilization, funding, and strategic direction of the SANDF. Secondly, when it comes to the level of discipline of deployed soldiers, we should actually follow up on what's happening there, because as Chair will remember, in the case of Colin Closa, who was killed during the first deployment of the SANDF, there was actually a court case that said that there should be a code of conduct specific to that specific operation that should accompany soldiers when they deploy. And then secondly, Chair, is also the role of the military ombudsman to speedily investigate relevant matters to its mandate. And then the third issue that we think should be followed up based on the recommendations from the oversight report is a discussion on the kind of training and equipment that's more suitable for domestic deployments to curb a civil unrest. Chair, on the next page there, on page 15, there were no study tours undertaken, there were no international agreements, there were no statutory appointments, there was no obligations conferred to us. But if we then look at some of the outstanding issues relating to the department entities that we've been grappling with, is firstly, at that stage, remember this was drafted the 26th of February. We said that there should be a discussion on the situation in Mozambique, and then the forensic report, as I said, we've dealt with, and then also the amount that DPWI spent on the allocated funds on the ramp, and I think that's something we should just follow up again, as well as the breakdown of expected future expenditure at one military hospital. And then encompassing all of those issues, Chair, is maybe also an issue on the future of the NEL, maybe a south of Bosparat. Chair, the next one is just with regards to petitions. There were no petitions, there were no interventions, and other matters that I referred to earlier, that was referred to the committee, was a letter from General Olomisha, and there you see the content of the referral, but more important, Chair, on the right-hand side is just the status of the report, where we say that the matter has been concluded on the 2nd of September, when we decided to close the investigation, but the task team could be re-established if circumstances warranted. There were no other matters referred to by the House Chairperson, so there were no challenges in this regard, no issues to follow up. Chair, the last part is just recommendations specific to the committee. That's now the internal operation of the committee. Firstly, Chair, something that we've mentioned last week as well is the clashes in the program of the NA and the NCOP. Like we had a challenge yesterday as well, that NCO members could not attend that closed meeting in Pretoria. So that is something that we continue to emphasize since we would like to see the two programs synchronized. Okay, the next one is just an internal issue as well. It relates to the adoption of especially reports of the committee that should be prioritized. Because that will assist us to give it back to the departments or entities so that they can actually action those recommendations. The next one is also internal, is just a follow-up mechanism with regards to our recommendations from the committee side itself. The other one is that presentation should be received well ahead of time. Last week we had a challenge with that, so we couldn't take a presentation because we received it only in the morning. And then we said that the chairperson of the NCACC and its members should be available, especially when the annual NCACC report is being presented. So that is just something that we should alert the members of the NCACC of. And then something that some members strongly felt about, they said that it's imperative that a minister attends, especially those meetings to which he is pertinently invited. And then the last one there is just that the administrative support for a committee, especially with regards to oversight business, this should be enhanced in order to avoid embarrassments of members not being able to execute their oversight responsibilities. The second last thing is just with regards to our strategic plan and our annual performance plan. As members are aware, we've conducted the strategic planning session, and we have a current valid strategic plan as well as an annual performance plan, which we reviewed last week. Thank you, Chair. That's all from my side.
Thank you very much, Peter. Well presented. Firstly, well packaged and well presented. So, are there any comments, colleagues? Let me just look at the thing on the side. Mr. Ryder, your apology, sir, was noted. You wrote to us to inform us that would be delayed. So welcome. Now is the opportunity to make a comment, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for noting and accepting the apology. I have been on for a little while now, so thank you, as promised. Chair, it's a good report, and I think you've said quite correctly. It was well put together and well presented. Thank you very much. There are two little issues that I'd like to highlight. The first one being, so it's right on page 2 of the document, under B 2.2, where it says that key focus area was monitoring the deployment of the Defence Force in support of SAPs, etc., and other arms of government. I think that's partly true, but that wasn't the only deployment that we've discussed over the past 12 months and the period under review. And we also did consider the deployments into Africa, into various other places as well. So I don't believe that's captured anywhere else in this first section, and it's something that I believe is relevant that should be there. The other comment I'd like to make goes right to the end of the document, to where we've just ended up, where we also made the point that we would like to have the president's letters when he does send them to us processed timeously, and I think that just needs to be captured as well somewhere, because it was part of our deliberation. I know there's ongoing discussions about the timing between when he sends the letters to us and when the troops are deployed, but certainly once we receive those letters, we need to discuss them promptly, whether we're on constituency period or not. And I think that should also be captured, please, somewhere, Chair, if possible. Thank you.
No, no. He is right. What do you say on that? So why I say Comrade Peter, Mr. Daniels?
Chair, Mr. Ryder is correct. But right here in the first section, we actually refer to the other deployments as well. So there, I've listed them, but I think it's maybe important that later on I also just highlight the others and maybe also refer to them when I refer to the recommendations. And yes, Chair, I do think that maybe for us here right at the end, there we should maybe include the whole issue of letters from the president. That we had discussions around it, and that we feel that the letter should be received promptly, and the whole issue that if Parliament is not sitting, that the committee can actually be called up to consider the issue. So I suspect, Chair, that the last issue, though the second issue raised by Mr. Ryder, I can maybe just include here in the recommendations.
I was going to say, hold on that aspect. Mr. Ryder, I've preempted you on the issue of the delay in submitting letters to Parliament. I've sought a legal opinion on it. We'll receive it on sometime next week on Thursday. So let's leave that out and consider it to be under discussion. Are you happy with that, Mr. Ryder?
Chair, almost. My concern, and I note the fact that you have sought that legal opinion, and it is still under discussion. My concern, my point is more about the time period between us receiving that letter and the committee sitting in processes.
Yeah. So, I think he's right.
So that was the issue. And then, okay. Sorry, Chair, and it's messy. I should have mentioned it in the first bite that I had on 2.2, is that it's not only the deployment that we've interrogated, but also the well-being of the troops, understanding that that's part of our mandate, is to consider the well-being of the troops. So it's not merely the deployment that we've discussed, we've also discussed the well-being, and I specifically refer here to issues around, expired food, et cetera, that the committee has covered. So I think it's important that we mention that that's something that we've done in 2.2, B 2.2 on page 2, and perhaps in the first section as well. But yeah, otherwise, good report. Thank you, Chair.
I hope you are not struggling into another financial year. Peter, what do you say on that? Can you still add it into this report?
Yes, Chair. We've discussed that. I remember at one stage, Chair, I said that the minister should actually come and brief us with regards to the situation in Mozambique. So that at that stage we haven't had a discussion on that. So maybe during that time we can also discuss that.
Okay, we have flagged it. We reflect it as flagged in the report. Okay. No. I think I'll be happy with that so that it doesn't get lost. If it's not covered comprehensively in this annual report, it will be covered in the next annual report when we have concluded our discussion on the matter. No, I'm happy with it. No, I think Mr. Ryder is correct, Mr. Peter, to say is our concern is the delay. Whether it is unreasonable or not is a matter that is under discussion, which I've actually sought a legal opinion on. When do we determine it as unreasonable? I'm not opening up a discussion because we had a discussion last week. But I then felt that, no, look, to be fair to the discussion, let's seek a legal opinion. When will we, the delay is there, is confirmed, nobody can deny it. When can we determine it as unreasonable? That's an issue that we'll discuss on the 18th of what? Next week. Right. You are happy with if we rest that issue on that note, Mr. Ryder?
Yeah, Chair, that's fine.
Thank you so much. All right, let me just check if there's any other hand. Shelembe, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still there, Chairperson.
Oh, okay. All right. Nice.
Are you looking for me, Chairperson? I know, Chairperson, that if you want me to engage, I'm not going to on that matter, Chairperson. You know my story. When it comes to that issue, the late letters to us, you know my story. So
no. That is well documented. That's well documented. That's the reason why I'm saying let's not retraverse the issue. We will look at it back when we receive the legal opinion. That's next week. All right, colleagues, I think we have concluded this. So, Peter, you assure us 100% that we were able to do everything that we have actually set ourselves to do, except those that are still under consideration. So that I'm happy that we did not underperform against our own plan. Is that what you can confirm tonight?
Yes, Chair. And last week, when we reviewed the annual performance plan, right at the end, we said there are some issues that we need to follow up. But as I said, going forward for the next 3 quarters, we can incorporate some of those issues there. But overall, Chair, we performed very well as a committee, Chair. Thank you.
No, I'm happy to hear that the committee has not been sleeping on the job. We've done well. We're not comparing ourselves with anybody. We're comparing ourselves with ourselves, our performance last year and the previous year. We are improving. I'm happy with that. And Chabo, are you still okay?
I'm fine, Chair. I'm fine.
I know if my whip is fine, then I'm fine. Yes, sir.
No. Chairperson, I'll appreciate maybe if you can try your best that, we return to Parliament, if we can't work like that, Chairperson, please look at that.
Return to Parliament?
Shelembe is tired of staying home.
Thank you, Honorable. Thank you, Honorable. Thank you. Anyway, not that I'm tired, but I want to work because now when we are in Parliament and attending the committees in person, it's good, to engage. No one, will find himself or herself sleeping, But that's my request, Chairperson. Please, can you try something?
Let me surprise you, Mr. Shelembe. I can tell you, you'll be in Cape Town and still hold these meetings from your own village because there are no committee rooms. That's the limitation. So we'll continue on Zoom for as long as for a foreseeable future, unless you say we go there and hire what you call hotel venues to run our own meetings. Let us not be too hard on ourselves. And we will go to Cape Town as soon as there is enough venue to accommodate all the committees to do their work in Cape Town. I mean, even Parliament is still held in that makeshift chamber. It's precisely for these reasons. We're not all in Parliament for the same reasons. But I don't want to go to town.
Chair, can I make an input on that point?
Let's do, Babu Umar.
Yeah, maybe Chair, as and when we make consideration, we know it's not going to be easy given the reasons that we have provided. But maybe in the next quarter, we can look at the items that might require us to be physical. And remember, the castle has offered us the venue. We have not visited them. We have not utilized that. But that is not an excuse for Honorable Shelembe to run away from assisting kids with homeworks. Thank you very much, Chair.
No.
Chair.
No. The fight between you and Shelembe, I'm not going to enter it. But you are right. We will consider what you call castles. They have offered us venue. In fact, we can even go to other bases of the military if we think it's necessary for us to meet like this, especially when we think we need to close the meeting because we want to take discussions that cannot be transacted in an open meeting. No, I'm happy with that. So we've started. We were in Pretoria yesterday in the military base. And tomorrow and the budget will all be in Cape Town, maybe in the council. Nandipa, please book council for our own budget meeting in Cape Town. It's going to. Oh no, it's not you. It's Brian. No, I'm sorry. Brian will book us council in the Good Hope Castle in Cape Town to deal with budget. It will be a physical meeting. We'll close it. We may have to spend the whole day dealing with this issue because I want this issue on the reserve force to come back. I want us to complete the discussion on the one force design, this force design and the restructuring, even before we start to discuss the budget. So that anything now, the figures we approve speak to the plan going forward. We can't be planning this way, left, but the budget going right. At some point, the two must come together. Right, I think we've concluded the discussion on this. Nandipa, do you have the minutes?
Yes, Chair.
Mangagi?
1, Chair.
1, okay, we're doing 1. Okay, please beam them. Right. Can we check if we have noted everyone who was, okay, is leaving now. What's happening? All right. I think it was just, okay. Colleagues on the attendance register. So what we're dealing with here, just go up a bit. So it was the follow-up meeting with the NDIC and a letter on Operation Vigela. And please don't come back on this delay issue. We'll deal with it next week. And then the review and consideration of the annual performance plan of the GSCD, and then the adoption of the minutes. So this was the attendance, colleagues. Shelembe was not in the meeting, but is recorded as having been present here. Continue.
Oh, Chairperson, what I've done to you?
You know. So there's page 2. Colleagues, just pick up any correction and just shout, please. I'm not going to look on the board. Shout if there's any correction. Move. Just complete the whole page, and then yeah, that was page 2. Page 3, any correction? Right, just go up right up to the last page. Right, that was page 3. Page 4, colleagues. Right, right up to the last page. Right, and then page 5. Okay, page 5. Yes, I think page 5 is the last page, colleagues. Right, must we accept these minutes as the true record of what transpired in our meeting last week? Let me just look at the record. Any mover for adoption?
I move, Honorable Chair. Honorable
Honorable Martha Bartlett moves. Thank you very much, Ms. Bartlett. Any seconder?
Ngiyamsekela sihlalo, ngiyamsekela.
Oh, ingcengela kumina ngiyakubona. Okay, Popshele seconded. Colleagues, that concludes the discussion on the minutes. Anything, Nandipa? We've concluded.
No, Chair, there's nothing. We've concluded everything on the agenda.
All right. Okay, so I colleagues, let me thank all of you for attendance this evening, and we will adjourn this meeting and then leave both Tabo and Shelebe to continue their meeting on the platform. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you.
And colleagues.
Yeah. Thank you, Salo.
And staff. Yes. Baba Shelembe. Lekhoshi Mutle. And others.